the campaign of the 5 battles. Khalid's new strategy was revolutionary against the static warfare of the Byzantine frontier. He would not engage in the long, grinding sieges. His goal was to break the enemy's will through a rapid succession of shock attacks, the battle for momentum that would clear the path to the major fortresses. He divided his consolidated army into the 5 traditional divisions: center, left wing, right wing, vanguard, and the rear guard, which he often commanded himself as the mobile guard, ready to reinforce any breaking point. The next few weeks were a blur of motion, a campaign of lightning strikes that the Byzantines would later call a fever. 1. The shock at Kazım. Khalid moved first against a strategic fortification at Kazım, where a local Christian garrison was entrenched. Rather than laying a long siege, Khalid used a brilliant feint. He sent a small cavalry detachment to engage the front, while his main force, circling unseen through the hills, attacked the weaker flank. The garrison collapsed within hours. Khalid offered the survivors the standard covenant: convert to Islam, pay the jizya, protection tax, and retain their faith and property, or fight. Many chose the jizya, seeing the Muslim force not as religious fanatics, but as highly disciplined soldiers who guaranteed peace and upheld their word. This adherence to the covenant, following the lesson of Malik, began to spread a favorable, if fearful, reputation among the Christian locals. 2. The speed of Qarayatin. Next they moved on Qarayatin. The Ghassanid patrols were now so terrified of Khalid's name that they hesitated to even scout the approaches. When Khalid's army appeared, the defenders were paralyzed by indecision. Khalid bypassed the formal siege machinery. He ordered a relentless 48-hour assault, never allowing the defenders rest. The Muslim forces fought in rotating shifts, keeping the pressure constant. This tactic, using psychological stress as a weapon, worked perfectly. The city surrendered, unwilling to endure the unending terror of the sword of God outside their gates. 3. The fall of Tadmor, Palmyra. The capture of Palmyra, Tadmor, was the most strategically important of the early phase. Palmyra controlled the eastern routes and was a symbol of imperial endurance. Its defenses were formidable, its commander resolute. Khalid did not use force, he used deception. He ordered his men to dig small trenches around the city and then stand in them, appearing to be engaged in a long, methodical siege. He then sent a small group of horsemen to approach the gates, seemingly distraught. The Palmyrian commander, emboldened by his seemingly secure position, allowed a messenger to approach. The messenger, acting on Khalid's instructions, spoke only of the immense size of the Byzantine imperial army marching from the north, and how Khalid was desperately preparing to retreat. The commander, believing Khalid's army was about to flee, relaxed his guard. This was the moment Khalid waited for. He launched a sudden, ferocious cavalry charge, the genuine flying column attack, that struck the gates before the defenders could react. The city fell rapidly. The speed of the conquest was less about the tactical genius and more about the psychological warfare. Khalid realized that the Byzantines, bloated by imperial bureaucracy and fixed military dogma, were easily deceived by unconventional warfare. The entire region was now convinced that the invaders were not a traditional army, but an elemental force. The Humanitarian Doctrine. These rapid victories were critical for more than military reasons. They established the moral code of the nascent state among the conquered people. In every city that surrendered through treaty or after a swift collapse, Khalid enforced the doctrine of justice and protection established by the caliphate. Freedom of worship, churches, priests, and religious practices were absolutely protected. This was a stark contrast to the religious persecutions often enforced by the warring Byzantine and Persian empires, which frequently forced specific sects of Christianity, like the Monophysites, to conform. Property rights, lands, houses, and businesses remained with the original owners. Jizya as insurance. The non-Muslim populations paid the jizya, a moderate tax. In exchange, they were exempt from military service, a massive burden under the Byzantines, and were guaranteed the full military protection of the caliphate. If the caliphate could not protect them, the tax was to be returned. a pact that emphasized the contractual nature of the rule. This policy was the true weapon of momentum. As news spread, the local populations, many of them Christian Arabs who felt alienated by the distant Greek-speaking Byzantine court in Constantinople, began to see the Muslims as preferable rulers. They were harsh in battle, yes, but they were consistent, disciplined, and religiously tolerant in governance. They brought order without oppression. This balance, ruthless efficiency in war and uncompromising justice and peace, was the core of the Muslim appeal to the Levant, and it was Khalid's greatest contribution to the expansion. The gathering storm. By the time Khalid's unified army reached the fertile land south of Damascus, they were no longer 10,000, they were close to 15,000, swelled by local Arab tribes who had previously served the Byzantines, but were now drawn by the promise of justice, low taxes, and the intoxicating aura of an army that could not lose. The impact of Khalid's lightning campaign was being felt deep in the heart of the Levant. The four original Muslim armies had been struggling for months. Khalid's single column had in mere weeks cleared the eastern flank, secured supplies, and terrified the entire network of Byzantine auxiliaries. The Ghassanids were shattered. The border garrisons were gone. The direct path to the capital of the region, Damascus, was open, though blocked by the fortress city of Bosra. The news finally reached the ears of the Emperor Heraclius in Constantinople. He had dismissed the initial raids as minor tribal skirmishes. Now he received a stream of frantic, contradictory reports. A general of impossible genius had appeared from the desert. His army was small but multiplied by victory, and every city that fell reported the invaders' terrifying fighting skill, but also their surprising mercy. Heraclius understood the gravity of the threat. This was no raid. This was a strategic invasion. Khalid's battle for momentum was complete. The initial engagements had achieved their goal. They had unified the Muslim command, terrified the enemy, and established a reputation for both military invincibility and moral accountability. The path to the first great prize, Bosra, lay open, setting the stage for the true test against Byzantine imperial power. The walls of Bosra and the covenant of safety. The shield of the empire. The fortress city of Bosra was a monument to the endurance of Roman power in the east, set strategically in the fertile Horan plain. It was a vital hub for both trade and military control, its massive black basalt walls forming an almost impenetrable shield for the road to Damascus. Bosra represented the first true test for the unified Muslim army under Khalid's command. Previous victories had been against isolated garrisons and terrified auxiliaries. Now they faced the full organized might of a Byzantine-held city. Khalid's consolidated army, now swelled to nearly 15,000 men, arrived at the outskirts of the city. The other commanders, veterans of failed sieges, were wary. Bosra was built to withstand assaults, its defenses a labyrinth of towers, deep ditches, and thick stone battlements. Khalid, however, viewed the massive defenses not as an obstacle, but as a cage. He declared, "Walls are but stone. They defend only as long as the men behind them believe they can be defended. Our aim is to prove that no stone, no matter how thick, can separate them from their fate." The Byzantine governor of Bosra, a resolute man named Romanus, had scoffed at the initial news of the desert invaders. He had ample supplies, a professional garrison, and the promise of a nearby relief force. He watched from the walls as the Muslims, unlike the siege armies of old, did not immediately begin building massive siege engines. Instead, they surrounded the city, forming a tight, disciplined ring of camps. Khalid's siege was of patience and psychological pressure. He knew that a frontal assault would cost too many lives, a price he was unwilling to pay. He opted instead for a total blockade, starving the city of intelligence, supplies, and most importantly, hope. Every day, small groups of Muslim archers and skirmishers tested the gates, never committing fully, but ensuring the defenders could never relax. The constant tension was the true siege weapon. The arrival of the auxiliaries. The quiet siege was shattered by the arrival of a Byzantine relief force dispatched from the north. This force was primarily composed of the remnants of the Ghassanid cavalry and other local Christian Arab auxiliaries, led by a capable general whose name history has largely forgotten, but whose intentions were brutally clear: lift the siege, and destroy the invaders. Seeing the dust cloud of the approaching enemy, the defenders of Bosra erupted in cheers. Romanus immediately ordered a sortie, coordinating a flanking attack with the approaching relief force. Khalid found himself in the difficult position he had anticipated, fighting on two fronts, with the enemy pressing from the outside while the besieged poured out from the fortress walls. This was exactly the scenario that had historically broken the earlier separate Muslim armies. For Khalid, however, it was an opportunity. This was the first time he could bring his entire unified army to bear in a tactical engagement against a mixed enemy force. Khalid did not panic. He assigned Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah, known for his steadiness, to hold the line against the sortie from the city gates. He then took his own mobile guard, the Taliya cavalry, and the best of the combined wings, and led them in a rapid countercharge toward the incoming Ghassanid relief force. The ensuing battle outside the walls of Bosra was a masterpiece of maneuverability and shock tactics. The Ghassanids, brave but disorganized and exhausted from their forced march, expected the Muslims to form a static battle line. Instead, Khalid's cavalry struck like a hammer. They did not engage in lengthy melee. They used the Kar Wafar tactics perfected in the Arabian desert. They charged, broke the Ghassanid formation, and wheeled away before the enemy could counter. Khalid, ever at the spearhead of the attack, spotted the Ghassanid commander. In a dramatic moment of personal heroism, Khalid broke through the bodyguard and challenged the commander to single combat. The duel was swift and brutal. Khalid, the master of the sword, ended the fight in seconds. The death of their commander, combined with the continuous, devastating pressure of the Muslim cavalry, who seemed to be everywhere at once, shattered the Ghassanid morale. They broke ranks and fled in a panic, leaving the field littered with their dead and their abandoned gear. The defenders of Bosra, who had watched the entire engagement from their high battlements, were struck speechless. They saw their last hope, a fresh, organized relief force annihilated by the speed and ferocity of the Muslim attack. They saw not a battle lost, but a terrifying reality. Khalid ibn al-Walid was unbeatable. The sortie force, hearing the panicked reports of the rout, hastily retreated back inside the city walls. The gates slammed shut, but the psychological damage was irreversible. Romanius and the price of despair. The fall of Bosra came not through the collapse of its walls, but the collapse of its will. Governor Romanus, witnessing the destruction of the relief army, descended into a bitter, despairing state. He realized the Emperor Heraclius was too far away, too consumed by managing the Persian recovery, to send a timely, powerful counterforce. The 4,000 men who had marched across the desert had, in a few short weeks, become an unstoppable wave. But the final act of betrayal came from within. Romanus, a deeply self-serving man, recognized that his imperial career was over. Before the city could rally, before the Byzantine officials could organize a defense, Romanus quietly opened negotiations with Khalid, offering the city's surrender in exchange for his own safety and wealth. Khalid, ever pragmatic, accepted. His goal was Syria, not unnecessary slaughter. A surrender through treaty was infinitely preferable to one through conquest. The city gates were opened. Khalid rode in, not with the triumphant blare of trumpets, but with a quiet, disciplined column of soldiers. The primary fear of the Christian populace, the fear of looting, rape, and burning that accompanied the fall of a city to Roman, Persian, or even Germanic invaders, was immediate and palpable. Khalid immediately calmed the streets. His soldiers were under strict orders. No man was to touch the property, person, or church of any Christian inhabitant. The covenant of safety, al-Dima. This moment, the first surrender of a major urban center, was the stage upon which Khalid established the foundational doctrine of the caliphate's relationship with conquered peoples, the covenant of safety, or the terms of Dima, protection.
He gathered the city's elders, priests, and notable merchants in the central square. Standing before them, his towering frame clad in the dusty, simple armor of a warrior, Khalid delivered the terms that would define the next 1,000 years of Islamic rule in the Levant. "We offer you one of three choices," Khalid stated, his voice resonating across the courtyard. "You may accept Islam, in which case you join us as brothers and share all the duties and all the rights of the caliphate." He paused, allowing the gravity of the statement to sink in. "Second, you may fight, but you have seen the result of fighting. Those who choose this path will bear the cost of the fight, for our mission is driven by a command from God, and we will not be deterred." "Third," he continued, holding up the famed treaty document prepared in Medina, "you may keep your faith, your churches, your livelihoods, and your homes. You will remain free to worship Christ and the Holy Mother, and your priests will continue their ministry. In exchange, you will pay the jizya." He then elaborated on the nature of the tax, correcting the widespread Byzantine propaganda that portrayed the invaders as barbaric religious fanatics imposing forced conversions or ruinous taxes. He stated, "The jizya is not a punishment for your faith, it is insurance for your protection. It is a moderate tax paid only by the physically capable men among you. It is a contractual fee in return for two absolute guarantees. Military exemption. You will be exempt from all military service. You will not be conscripted into our armies, nor will you be forced to defend this city. The entire burden of defense and securing the peace falls entirely upon our shoulders. Protection and non-interference. Your blood is our blood to protect. Your churches, your priests, your property, and your lives are under the direct, unshakable covenant of the Caliph. If we fail to protect you, if we are defeated, we will return every single coin of the jizya that you have paid, for we would have failed our contractual duty." This doctrine was revolutionary. Under the Byzantine rule, the local populace had faced ruinous imperial taxation, arbitrary seizures, and compulsory conscription into an army that frequently lost. The Monophysite Christians, in particular, had suffered systematic religious persecution from the Greek Orthodox state apparatus in Constantinople. Here they were offered religious tolerance, guaranteed protection, and exemption from the horrors of war, all in exchange for a fixed, manageable tax. It was a pragmatic and contractual bargain that appealed powerfully to the merchants and farmers of the region. The city elders of Bosra, witnessing the defeat of the Byzantine army and the fairness of the terms, accepted almost immediately. The first major urban center in the Levant had fallen, not to the violence of the sword, but to the superior social contract offered by the nascent caliphate. The fall of Bosra sent a deep tremor through the entire Byzantine frontier. The invaders were not only unstoppable on the field, but they were also offering better terms of governance than the emperor himself. The path to the capital, Damascus, was now cleared, and the psychological warfare was now backed by a credible political and humanitarian appeal.